Good morning, future lightworkers of America. So here we are standing on the cusp of a changing world and beginning to see things as they really are. Um, and one of those things that I see as it really is my ego, right? So I've been doing ego work for a long, long time, through 12-step programs, therapy, um, and all of these changes for me are always prompted by some level of pain, right? So recently, in the last year or so, I stumbled across this woman who calls herself the holistic psychologist, right? I think she is a really cool chick. I like the way that she looks at the world and the people around her. And some of the things that caught my attention were the way that she looks at trauma and how to heal it, right? She simplifies the process, and for me, the simple processes are what make the most difference. But the second thing, what I'm here to talk about today, is the ego. And basically, for me, it's befriending the ego, right? So, she's got this 6-step process, and as with any process or any practice that I come across, I sort of change it to intuitively meet my own needs, right? So I'm all about putting pen to paper and getting the ideas and understanding out of my logical mind and into my creative mind, right? So as I was doing this ego work, I do a lot of it in the shower, right? So before I begin any step to any practice, it's always about taking like 3 deep cleansing breaths, right? So when I breathe, it's like in for 7, hold for 7, out for 7, right? And I repeat that 3 times before I begin the process. And her the first step to in her 6-step process was an affirmation. And if you have ever encountered me or we've done any sort of work together, you know how engaged I am with affirmations, right? So for 7 days in the shower and out of the shower, I would close my eyes, take my 3 deep breaths, and then I would repeat this affirmation. And I really repeated the affirmation throughout the day for 7 days. And the affirmation is, I am safe, and I now choose a new way to experience myself as separate from my ego. I am safe, and I now choose a new way to experience myself as separate from my ego. And I would just continue using that affirmation, right? And then for step 2, which for me is really just a level of correspondence along with step 1, is for those 7 days, I was taking note of how I speak to myself and others, when it was authentic, when I was authentically coming from myself, and when I wasn't. And those times that I wasn't speaking kind and helpful words to myself and others were the times that my ego was in play, right? So let's say I woke up in the morning and I'd light a cigarette and my ego's like, you shouldn't be smoking. That's going to make you smell bad, and people are going to look at you like you're not spiritual, and all of these other things, right? And which, with each of the thoughts, I would simply take my middle finger of my right hand and tap my left inner wrist, right? And I would do that every time I was aware of coming from ego, right? And I would rebalance that with a affirmation of, I now deeply and completely accept myself, and I would just tap my wrist while I said these things. So that helped me to witness my ego and also using the skills that I have for many years, and that is rebalancing and canceling out the negative thoughts about myself and others with positive thoughts about myself and others, right? So I did that along with the affirmation, I am safe, and I now choose a new way to experience myself as separate from my ego. So I did that for about 7 days or so, right? And then step 3 is where you actually name your ego. So, like I took the 3 deep breaths and I literally envisioned my ego as myself standing in front of me, and I asked her her name. And I went through a few names, right? So throughout a 2-week period, I went through a few names. I wanted to name her humility, so as to calm her down, but along with the affirmation that I am safe and I now choose a new way to experience myself as separate from the ego. Like when I would say I am safe and I now choose a new way to experience myself as separate from humility, I mean, you might be able to see how that doesn't work. Like it separates me from humility and put me right back into ego. So at the end of the 2-week period, it was probably about a 2-week period, I came up with the name Jane. And so my idea with Jane that came to mind was plain Jane, right? A neutral creature that neither acted aggressively nor passively. She was assertive. She was just plain. She was just humble, right? So I was sharing this experience with my husband. He's my biggest supporter. And when I mentioned the name Jane, he said, "You mean Calamity Jane, right?" Which is really hilarious because my ego did put me into some of the most awkward situations, So now I've named my ego, and I begin to take a look at when she was triggered, right? And my biggest place for triggering is with the matriarchal line of my family of origin, both going backward ancestral and forward with my children. So interacting with my daughters, my mother, my sister, those times my ego was really triggered, right? Like times when I come from a long line of shot takers and they think it's funny and it's coming from a place of love, but my ego kicks up, right? My ego kicks up when you tell me that I'm putting weight on, or that I look tired, or that I'm not doing something in the correct way, right? So I started to pay a lot of attention to when my ego was triggered, and I came up with this practice where I would tap the table or the seat or chair next to me, and I would say, no, Jane, let's just come and sit here beside me, right? And that was a wonderful experience for me, like just paying attention to when my ego is activated. And my final step with building the relationship with who is now my best friend, my BFF forever, Jane, was I treated it as if it was an inner child healing, and I pictured Jane standing in front of me, and I called her forward, and I asked if I could put my arms around her and if I could hug her, and I went through this whole dialogue of thanking her for her level of protection, for protecting me throughout my whole life and doing for me what I wasn't able to do for myself, and standing up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself, and speaking for me when I couldn't find the words to speak assertively for myself. And I asked her and assured her that I could now protect myself. I could now speak my mind without fear of confrontation. I can now stand up for myself in situations that I need to stand up for. I can now speak kind and helpful words to myself and others so that we all might be free of our suffering and our root of our suffering. And I just sort of loved her. And I invited her to walk with me and beside me and not to step in front of me anymore. And so Jane is one of my best friends, so a whole nother talk will be about Jane as one of my spirit guides, but yet again, that's a whole different topic. So now that Jane has become my friend, I can take her guidance as if she's speaking to me from the spirit realm. So I want to thank everybody for listening, and I hope that this process helps you in some sort of way. If you want to walk through my process with me, please reach out to me at findyourfeathers.org or Finding Your Feathers with Featherly on Facebook. I would love to schedule a session with you. If you are interested in doing more work with Nicole, the holistic psychologist, you can find her on YouTube, Facebook, and again, it's the holistic psychologist.